Welcome to Journey of Enlightenment. I am your host, Dr. Roger Gopal. Have you ever experienced guilt? I think most of us would answer, yes, I have experienced guilt. It might be for something that I knew was wrong that I did before, or something that I did not know was wrong at that point in time, but may have realized it later on. And many a times we allow this guilt to harbor in our minds, to grow, and also to affect us in many ways. And those ways can be positive, meaning it can change the way that we see things and the way that we operate. Or it can be negative, whereby we can live with a heavy burden on our shoulders. Robert Salt, a famous theologian, once said, he said that guilt upon the conscience, that is the mind, is like rust upon iron, where both defiles and consumes it, gnawing and creeping into it, as that does which at last eats out the very heart and substance of the metal. Unquote. What Robert Salt is saying here is that if guilt is left unchecked, if we don't learn how to deal with guilt and channel guilt in a proper way, then it can have a very disastrous and destructive effect on our mind, our attitude, and our behavior. Today's topic, we would look at letting go of guilt. In the Ramayana, we were told that Bharat was informed of his mother's deeds, which caused the exile of Sri Ram, Sita, accompanied by Lakshman. When Bharat found this information out, he was utterly devastated. And his response was, though I am born of a wicked woman, and myself a rogue and guilty, I know that Sri Ram would have mercy upon me. Bharat felt that guilt based upon what happened to his dear brother Sri Ram. He felt that sense of remorse. Despite the fact that Bharat did not cause his mother's reaction, at least not directly. It was her own pride, it was her own greed, and it was her desire for power that caused Sri Ram to be exiled and to cause the death of King Dasarath. Yet Bharat placed upon himself that feeling of guilt. And he knew that Sri Ram would one day, in the goodness of Sri Ram, forgive him. Bharat lived with that guilt. Many a times in our lives, we would face this issue of guilt. What exactly is guilt? There are different ways that we have found guilt to be defined. A simple explanation for guilt is that it is a moral feeling, such as regret over something that you consider to be your personal standard, which is now compromised. So when you reflect on an action, a word, maybe even a thought, and it contradicts or it conflicts your personal standard, then guilt sets in. Many of us would have experienced this in different aspects of our lives. And we cannot help but identify that this guilt can have a devastating effect on the way we interact with others and how it might shape the way we think and the way we behave overall. There is a story of a girl who grew with her elder brother and her two parents. The parents were very old and They were from a family without much economic means. But it was the ideal family. A very loving brother, very loving sister, very loving parents. And the relationship between the brother and sister was one that could have set an example for the world to follow. However, at age 24, the brother was diagnosed with brain tumor. And it was a devastating blow to the family. The parents had no idea what to do. So the sister was the one who was fully responsible for making all the decisions and taking care of her brother. They sought the best treatment that they could afford at that point in time. But all results showed that it was too late. That any surgery would result in death anyhow. After some months, the brother died. The sister was inconsolable. She did not know how to accept the fact that her brother was no longer there. She felt a sense of guilt. Why? For two main reasons. Did she do enough? And did she care for him enough? She felt that maybe if she had borrowed money, maybe if she had taken him to see other doctors or try alternative medication, that might have worked. That should have saved his life. The truth is that despite all the doctors he saw, they all said the same thing. But this girl refused to accept that as her truth. She still felt she should have done something more to save him. And she lived with that guilt. The second reason, as I said, is that she should have cared more. This is what she kept telling herself. I should have loved him more. I should have spent more time with him. But she spent as much time as she could. She shaved him on a daily basis when he could no longer shave himself. She cut his hair for him when he could no longer walk to see a barber. She cut his toenails and his fingernails for him. She did everything that she can. But despite this, the narrative that she kept telling herself made her feel guilty. She carried this guilt upon her shoulders. And it was severely affecting her mind, her mental construct, the way she saw life, the way she saw herself, the way she responded to life, to friends, and the hope that was lost as a result. It was not an easy process for her to deal with this guilt. Time after time, seeking the right counseling, seeking the right advice, she asked a few questions. Is it wrong then to grieve for my brother? And the answer is no. Nothing is wrong with grieving for the loss of a loved one. In fact, it is healthy to grieve. And it is even more healthy to express that grief. But it is not healthy to accept guilt when guilt did not exist in this particular case. She was not guilty of anything, despite the fact that she felt that she had compromised her own moral convictions. She then had to reverse that narrative that yes, her brother did die, but she loved him as much as any sister could love her brother. And she needed to remember what that love was like between them. And yes, she can miss him, but celebrate that love nevertheless. That yes, we would all think there is something more that we could have done, that we should have done to help our loved ones. But in his particular case, they did all that could have been done. She eventually began accepting this as her reality. She did all that could have been done. She now lives with that love and that memory for him, but she was able to shed the guilt of that particular circumstance. In that particular instance, with this girl and her brother, the guilt that she felt was an unreal guilt. It was an illusion. She created this guilt in her mind based upon a false narrative. What about guilt where an actual act was done that was morally wrong, contradicting one's own personal moral compass? There is a particular instance that I know where a father decided that his work was more important than his family. While his children grew and his wife was forced to stay at home to take care of the children, the father went out to work. Many days would not come home, spend time with friends, in other pleasurable company, and his children were left behind. When the children grew, they went about their own lives, and the father then realized that they were no longer babies in the house anymore. They were now grown, and what he should have shared with them was not there anymore. The memories that should have been created were not there. The photos that should have filled a family album was non-existent. One day he sat in his office looking out the window, and he said to himself, I have failed as a father. And when I look back in my life, all I can see are strangers and a good time that was very temporary in nature. But the good time that should be everlasting in my heart and in my memories are not there. He reached out to his children, but they were not interested in having a relationship with him anymore. As far as they were concerned, he was a stranger. He started drinking heavily in order to drown his sorrow, in order to find solace because of the guilt that he was now living with. His wife was now estranged, and she lived with her children rather than him. He was now a lonely man, longing for the company of his wife, longing for the company of his children, but it was not there as he hoped. He lived with that guilt. In speaking with him, he recollected that yes, he did wrong, and at that point in time, he did not feel it was wrong because he was more caught up with having a good time. He was more caught up with the lights and the glamour of his job and the prestige that it brought to him. But upon reflection, he realized that the simple things that he took for granted were the things that would have made his life most meaningful. How do you deal with such guilt? What do you do? In his case, his first step was not necessarily asking his wife and his children for forgiveness. His first step was self-forgiveness. He had to understand that the problem was him. This is what he did. He accepted the fact that he was responsible and he learned how to just simply say, I forgive me. Once that is done, any one of us, looking at ourselves in the mirror, we have all made mistakes. We have all done wrong, somewhere, somehow. It starts by looking at ourselves and saying, I forgive me. He was then ready to reach out to his estranged family. But unfortunately, his wife was no more. She had passed away. And he did not know what to do because he needed her forgiveness. One day, he went to her graveside and he knelt down and he spoke. And he said, I have done you wrong for most of your life. I should have been a better husband. I should have been a better father. But I did wrong. Will you forgive me? And he said at that moment, he felt a sense of relief. Because even though she was not there physically, he knew to himself that he was now pouring out that sense of regret. That he did something wrong and now he's seeking forgiveness that frees him from the burdens that he once carried. The relationship with his children, especially his son, did not want to speak with him, did not want to have much to do with him. But time after time, he was able to build a certain level of communication with them. And though it's not the same, he was able to say, I am sorry. Seeking forgiveness and forgiving oneself is the most powerful tool in ensuring that we remove that burden of guilt that we carry in our lives. Self-forgiveness is the first step, followed by genuinely asking others to forgive us of our wrongs. So whether our guilt is a perceived guilt, or whether our guilt is something that was actually done in the past, the first thing that we need to do is to identify our self-dialogue. Is it something that is real? Is it something that we have actually done? Or is it a burden that I'm carrying that is not really a burden that I should carry? And if it is not, then we need to be able to let go. If our guilt is as a result of what we have done, people we have hurt, including ourselves, then we move into self-forgiveness. We move into self-appreciation, self-gentleness. And we also seek the forgiveness of those we have hurt. Even if it is not possible to reach them, put it out there. Just simply say, please forgive me, for I have done wrong. We should no longer carry that guilt in our lives because it adds no value. But instead, let us replace guilt with forgiveness, with love, with kindness, ensuring that we become better people. Thank you once again for joining me in this episode of Journey of Enlightenment.